excited to have these three expert panelists. And they all have different subject areas to cover. Taylor, I'll come back and read the bios in a second. Taylor's going to talk about the process.
Leave the sound on. You don't really have to watch it.
Can everybody mute can everybody mute? Maybe I can mute everyone. Let's see. Who's not muted?
Still going.
Okay, this is really a problem.
Sound on, not watch it.
Okay,
There's a thing
everybody
where you
mute,
can mute all.
Mute. Okay.
As host, there's a spot you can mute them.
Okay, I can't figure out who is not muted. Let's see. Anyway, okay. So first up is Taylor. He's going to talk about the process of getting the visa, and then and housing, which are the two main things you need to think about at first. And then the second main thing you need to think about is starting a business. And Aaron Hoyles is going to talk about that. And then Christie DuChateau is a tax expert who's going to talk about the fiscal implications for Americans who are living and working abroad. So I'm just going to read the bios of all three quickly. I'll probably do a shortened version. So Taylor is the Taylor Zdruli, I probably didn't pronounce that right. You can correct us when you go on. Is the founder of TZ Strategies, a strategic marketing consulting firm that transforms business challenges into opportunities through innovative strategies, data-driven insights, and expert execution. Previously, he focused heavily in the U.S. business sector. As chief growth officer at DeFaro in Washington, D.C. He led business development, sales strategy, expanding the company's presence across retail spaces and digital marketplaces. Later, though, he fell in love with a Dutch woman, and this is often the story of people going to Holland, actually. And that is when his journey started in finding a way to live in the EU. After countless months spent researching the best options for Americans, it was by pure coincidence that the DAFT visa was the easiest option. He now lives in the Netherlands under the DAFT visa with his Dutch partner. His consulting business has created an in-depth 30-page guide with step-by-step instructions for Americans seeking to become residents of the Netherlands under the DAFT visa. And he's running a special on his website, tzstrategies.com. If you use the code JANA5, you get a discount. So welcome, Taylor. Now, Aaron Hoyles, MBA, is an international business expert and founder of Global Approach Advising. With over 15 years of experience in global strategy, cross-cultural communication, and professional development, Aaron specializes in helping leaders, teams, and organizations navigate the complexities of international and cross-cultural professional environments. As a former U.S. Navy submariner turned entrepreneur, that's impressive, Aaron combines technical expertise with business and cultural insight to empower professionals relocating to and working from the U.S., EU, and beyond. He's delivered impactful coaching, workshops, and consulting services for employees at global companies such as Amazon and Logitech, as well as top academic institutions. Aaron's unique approach focuses on practical, measurable outcomes, including navigating cultural adaptation, building high-performing international teams, and enhancing workplace communication. You can find him at globalapproachadvising.com. Christie DuChateau, expat U.S. tax advisor, CEO of B&C Tax. She's an enrolled agent with the IRS. She has extensive experience advising and strategizing on U.S. tax compliance while living abroad. She's the owner of B&C Tax and Accounting, which she moved to the Netherlands when she came here to join her Dutch husband in 2015. She and her team have helped more than 1,000 clients remain compliant annually. B&C Tax and Accounting has filed more than 10,000 expat tax returns in 26 countries and is proud to be a leader in the U.S. tax services for Americans in the Netherlands. Their specialization includes business owners on DAFT, relocating employees, retirees, and love pets. Christy is also a mom to 4-year-old Sienna and 1-year-old Logan, who keep her busy year-round. Her initial consultations are free at bnctax.com stroke appointment. So welcome, everyone. And we're going to jump into each of the panelists is going to give a short little introduction to what they're doing. Please hold your questions through their talk. We're going going to go Taylor and then Aaron and then Christy. And then we're going to open it up. I've got a bunch of questions to ask them because I really am very curious about this. But you can then at that point, feel free to put your questions into the chat and I will take them as they're relevant. So, all right. So go ahead, Taylor. Tell us everything you know.
Thank you. Fantastic intro. That's exactly right. I fell in love. And so that's where my search for a way to live in the EU started. But my brief introduction, I'll be speaking mainly about the visa requirements, the application process, and giving you a quick overview on how to find housing. So very quickly, the DAFT visa stands for the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty visa. It's an agreement between the Netherlands and the US that facilitates entrepreneurial opportunities between the two countries. To qualify, you need just a few things. Number one, you must establish a business in the Netherlands. That is a requirement once you move there. Second, you have to deposit at least 4,500 euros in a business bank account. And that is a requirement that basically demonstrates your financial independence, but also your financial commitment to starting a business in the Netherlands. Third, obviously, you need a valid passport with at least 6 months on it before it expires. You'll also need to provide potentially a no criminal record, right? So you have to show a criminal record. Sometimes this is not required, sometimes it is, depends on the application. And finally, health insurance. You need Dutch health insurance, but this can be arranged basically after you become a resident with a resident permit. These, generally speaking, are the requirements. The application process is very simple. This year, they changed the application process. So you're getting approved before, and then you're doing the other steps. But overall, the steps are the following. You submit your application. You submit this through the IND, which is the immigration body, governmental body in the Netherlands. And then you'll need to submit your form, your business registration details, and the proof that you have invested or it's, let's say, deposited 4,500 euros in a business bank account. All the application is done via mail, so you have to print it and physically send it over. Then you must register your business. This is done through the Kamer van Koophandel, which is the KVK, the Chamber of Commerce, the Dutch Chamber of Commerce. And then basically, once you're approved, you will also get a BSN number. This is basically your social security number, and this will be necessary for all the different types of communications that you will have with the Dutch government. So it's really a crucial process in that step. And finally, you will have to wait for approval. Usually it's pretty quick. The IND gives 90 days. But this year, as I said, in April, the process changed and some of you might be approved as quickly as in 4 weeks. That was my case, actually. And then you have 6 months to submit the rest of the required documentation, such as business registration, money invested in the business account, etc. So the process is much easier this year. Hopefully it stays like that. And then finally, a note on housing. So finding housing in the Netherlands can be challenging since there is a lot of demand for housing and there's a lot of people in a very small country, especially in cities like Amsterdam or Utrecht. So I have a couple of tips for you. First of all, start early. Begin your search as soon as you plan your move. This will be crucial to give you a bit of a runway in finding and understanding a bit how the market is. Second, use platforms like funda.nl, pararius.com, Housing Anywhere. These are websites where you can find housing, and basically it's where all the rentals will be available for you to check out. Then consider temporary housing. Some shorter term rentals or expat housing agencies can help you while you find a more permanent place. As a matter of fact, you can also register in some longer term hotels. And these are mainly for usually workers moving to the Netherlands on a shorter notice. And then finally, landlords will often ask for proof of income or, some references. So try to have some of these things early. Even if they're from the US, it's no problem. This shows that you have, let's say, a cushion there available for you. Either way, I've created a more than 30-page guide after doing all the research around in Europe to finding the best visa. And it's available right now, as Jana said, on my website. I'll be posting my website on the chat there. But other than that, that's the gist of it. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Taylor. That's great. Aaron, and by the way, you guys hold your questions, but these are great questions that I'm seeing in the chat, and we will get to all of them. Aaron, go ahead. Tell us about being an entrepreneur in the Netherlands.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. And Taylor, thank you. That was a really nice, concise summary of a lot of the key important points and helps lead right into what I'm talking about, which is the business side. So one of the things to really emphasize about the DAFT visa, it's an amazing opportunity and it offers, as Taylor was pointing out, a lot of easier steps than many comparable visas in other countries, but it is at its heart an entrepreneurship visa. So this is something that's important to think about. Entrepreneurship can mean many different things, but let's just talk about being self-employed. If you've always been employed, if you've never worked for yourself, it's not like you're lesser prepared, but it's just a mindset shift that you have to take into considering this, evaluating whether it's the right choice for you. So myself, I ended up becoming an entrepreneur through both, I guess it was my natural path, but also through necessity when I was looking for flexibility to continue staying in Europe. I first moved over to do graduate school, did my MBA in France, then took a job in Belgium, and it was great to experience working in the EU, but it was very different being an employee. At the time, I had something called an EU Blue Card, which offers a lot of flexibility, and you have a very good work-life balance and all of that, but you're required to be attached and sponsored by an employer. And later on, when I was looking for flexibility, I'd already started working for myself a bit part-time, and I had worked in my professional life, sometimes advising at incubators and doing consulting with growing businesses. So I had a little bit of familiarity, but it didn't really prepare me as much as I thought for the shift of now working for myself. So that mindset shift is, I'd say, one of the first most important steps. And that might sound very like non-concrete kind of soft sort of thing, but it is really essential. And the next part, I would say, in looking at the business aspect of the DAFT visa is if you are trying to figure out what you're going to do, whether you already have a core skill set or something that you want to provide, or you just have no idea, start small. I will only have a couple points, but I wanted to know if possible, could I share a small slide, just one,
Sure, go ahead.
one image? Okay.
See if you can just share it. If not, I'll.
I'm going to send you a request, and then
Okay,
it's
there you
just
go. Okay.
something that will help illustrate
And maybe can
what
you
I
share
wanted to
those
say.
slides with everybody in the chat?
Yep,
so they can-
absolutely. And this is just more of just this right here. So can everybody see this?
It's kind of small. Let's see. Oh, I can make it bigger. I see. Everybody can make
Okay.
it bigger on your own screen.
And I'll send this to you afterwards. This is not my own creation. Some of you might be familiar with this. This is called the business model canvas. There's different iterations of it. It's something commonly used when people are ideating businesses, say in the startup realm. It came out of actually, I believe a Swedish guy invented it, but it's something that I advise people if you're thinking about what to do professionally and you're just, however you work, you mind map it out, you're having brainstorming sessions, this is a good way to jot down and kind of organize your thoughts as you're creating a business. Because once again, if you choose to do the DAFT, this is an entrepreneurship visa. So you got to start thinking of yourself and your career a little differently if you have not been self-employed before. And this is a nice way to help figure out, okay, I want to do this, but what would be the revenue streams? Okay, here's some ideas. And it's just it's just a canvas. You paint on it, you erase, you redo. Something like this could be a good start. Then the next set of considerations.
I'm hungry.
The next consideration I would say is you really, so we've got Christy here. I'm really looking forward to see what she has to say, because you need to find a trusted advisor like her, also on the Dutch side, on the US side, because some of these considerations will influence what type of business you create or how you create that business. When you come here on DAFT, you can follow two models. One that's basically like a sole proprietorship, the ZZP. I am not going to butcher the Dutch by trying to say the full name, but that is basically a sole proprietorship. It's a bit more streamlined. And the next type is a BV, which is it's somewhat analogous to our LLC, a little bit more involved, but basically it's an entity. There's different tax considerations. So you might have a lot of assets that you need to minimize your tax exposure to. Again, Christy would speak to this, but therefore you might benefit from setting up a BV, which could change some aspects of how you deliver a business. So this is just why those things go hand in hand. Another, and this not to say one is better or more limited, it's just that you have to understand these things so you can make the decision as you create a business. The last thing I would say is you really need to look at how you can be successful when you are moving to a new country and you are going to be in a new environment, managing all those stresses and opportunities that come from the new culture. But how are you going to do that with your client base? Are you going to be focusing entirely on just doing it in the new country? DAFT does not require you to have any Dutch connection to your business. That's not saying that it's not beneficial, but understand that. So could it be beneficial for you to start off in the US, maintaining, growing something there before you move and then maintain it? I have maintained much of my business in the US, even though I didn't come here directly from the US. That's something to consider. So all of these things, successful businesses are often service-based. They're very often businesses that are like consulting, coaching. If people have ICF certifications, they're doing executive coaching or specific areas, training, creative work, service work and knowledge work can do well. Now, there are also people successful on DAFT who have a bakery or a brick and mortar business. There are different hurdles to overcome with those. It depends on your location too, but there's a lot of opportunity, but it starts with the mindset shift and then having something like this business model canvas to just use as a playground to work through your ideas. So that would sum up what I'd have to say about the business side of it.
Thank you. That was super interesting. I have so many questions for you as somebody who's been an entrepreneur pretty much my whole life, or self-employed, I should say. Entrepreneur sounds very grand. Okay, now, Christy, I know we have a lot of questions about, I've heard personally a lot of people have questions about the tax implications. So if you could just walk us through that and also tell us also about what you do and your experience of being a business owner in the Netherlands, which I guess everyone here would hope to become.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much, Taylor and Aaron, for those summaries. That's really good information for everybody to know as they're exploring their move to the Netherlands. So everyone here is steps ahead of where I was when I came to the Netherlands because I did zero research. I was a love pat, and I came when I met my boyfriend who was Dutch, and he said, hey, you should come to the Netherlands. And I showed up, and then he said, hey, do you have a visa? And I said, do I need a visa? He said, if you want to stay, you need a visa. And that's when I started exploring my options, which was already too late. So good on you guys for going ahead and getting started. It will make your life easier if you are prepared. So I will talk a little bit about the tax implications. And what I'm going to do is just outline the three top line main things that I think you should know about your taxes when you become a resident of the Netherlands, because there are so many endless things we could talk about when it comes to taxes, but let's keep it kind of top line for this conversation. So the first thing you need to know is that your tax residency shifts to the Netherlands. And what that means is that the Netherlands will tax your worldwide income. So if you're already a successful entrepreneur in the US, you can't just leave your business interests behind in the US and, avoid taxation in the Netherlands on those business interests. Everything that you do will become taxable in the Netherlands, but we do have a tax treaty with the US. So there are mitigations for double taxation, but just be aware that your tax residency when you live in the Netherlands is in fact in the Netherlands, and your first line of taxation lies with the Netherlands. The second thing that's going to be very different is on Social Security tax. If you're already an entrepreneur, then you are aware of paying self-employment taxes, which is your Social Security and your Medicare taxes. And in the Netherlands, we have the same kind of idea, although it is limited. So your taxation from a Social Security standpoint will be lower in the Netherlands. And there is a totalization agreement with the US, which basically just means you won't pay into the US Social Security system while you're living in the Netherlands. You just pay into the Dutch system. And we can talk more if you guys have questions about what that means when you retire. A little bit different conversation. You will need to file US taxes annually because your worldwide income is also taxable in the US. And then there's a number of different items you can use to mitigate your US taxes based on the Dutch taxes that you have paid. The second big thing to note when you move to the Netherlands is that the effective tax rate may be different from what you're currently used to in the US. And it could be more or it could be less. And it really just depends on your situation. In the Netherlands, if you're in a lower income tax bracket, and by lower, I mean very low, you might pay no tax at all. The first approximately 20,000 euros of income is not taxed at all in the Netherlands. And then there's a jump to roughly up to 73,000 euros of income is in sort of the middle range average bracket, which seems very low from a US tax perspective, but from a Dutch tax perspective, that's very average. Then you're in a tax bracket, which usually means you'll be in an effective tax rate of about 20 to 30%. And anything above around 73,000, then you're looking at higher tax brackets. People sometimes get afraid because there is a high tax bracket of 49.5%, but I will say in my entire career as a tax advisor, and I've been working here in the Netherlands for 10 years, I've never seen a single tax return where somebody's paying 49.5% effectively. So I would not imagine that that's going to be the case. For most of my clients, I see somewhere between 20 and up to 40% in the really high cases. And sometimes it's much lower, like I mentioned. And the third thing to note is that there is something that most Americans are unfamiliar with, which is a wealth tax. The wealth tax comes into play now, even if you're on DAFT and you have a BV. So a lot of times, if you're doing internet research now, you'll be seeing things about how you can be exempt from the wealth tax if you have a BV, but that's out of date because the tax rules are actually changing as of January 1st, 2025. You're no longer exempt from the wealth tax just by having that BV or the 30% ruling, if you have seen any internet research about that. So don't trust the internet. Things are changing here. The tax rates are getting effectively a little bit higher here in the Netherlands, and you will be subject to wealth tax inevitably if you come over here from the US. Now, this is not to scare you because I will say that a lot of people here find that the cost of living is much lower. Things like health insurance are much lower. So we do pay into a national health insurance system, which costs on average about 120 euros per month per person. And other cost of living items can be much cheaper as well. So please be aware that your tax is not the only reason to move, but there are, of course, special ways that we can mitigate your taxation between the US and the Netherlands when you move. And just remember that on my personal note, simple is beautiful. So what I mean by that is don't try to get too fancy by setting up a holding company to own your LLC, to own your BV, et cetera, et cetera. Most people don't need that type of construction. If you're coming over for the sole purpose of just migrating to Europe, just for your own living purposes, probably you just need a very simple setup. So don't get tricked into setting up a nesting set of companies, because all you'll be doing in the end is paying legal and administrative fees.
Great, that was really amazing. Thank you so much. I know everybody's very impressed by the knowledge you're getting from these three. And Christy, I have so many questions for you as well. I have questions for all of you. So I'm going to say who the question is for, but actually whoever of the three of you panelists who wants to answer it, if it's more appropriate for the other one, just pass it on to someone else. So I'm going to start back with Taylor. Taylor, you made it look really straightforward and simple to get the DAFT visa. It feels like a very simple process. And by the way, somebody asked in the chat, can you start the process before you get there? I think you have to go there first on a tourist visa, right? And then you start. What's the most important thing to make sure that you get this done right? And can you start it in advance?
Right. So the verbiage on the IND website is quite clear that you need to be physically present in the country when you are applying. However, if you do the BV route, which basically is you're opening a corporation and you're, doing a bit more complicated business structure, I have seen people that have been able to apply it beforehand. However, I don't really recommend that, and there's no need to apply before you're in the Netherlands. The reason why is because the Netherlands works extremely efficiently. You will receive a mail at your address, probably within 10 to 12 days max, where you're going to have to then go in person and get a picture taken and give your fingerprints. That will be the first appointment, basically, that will come in place after you have applied and also paid for your visa. Remember, you pay for the visa, whether it's granted or not, you have to pay for the application process anyways. So in my experience, it's not really necessary, but it is absolutely possible to apply beforehand.
Which
Now,
actually brings me
yes,
to another question.
please.
How often do people not get approved, and for what reason might you not be approved? Like what if you move your whole life there and then you're not approved?
Well, the requirements are so simple that the only reason why you might not get approved is maybe because you have a criminal record that the Netherlands doesn't go well with. But again, I was not asked for a criminal record, document. And so as long as you are providing the 4,500 euros in a business bank account, opening a Dutch business and registering, so as Christy said, moving your tax residency to the Netherlands, you will be approved. And so as far as I know, there's not really specific numbers that we get from the IND. I know that it's about 300 to 400 people probably per year applying to this. Of course, it varies greatly. It's very little. And as far as I know, I have never seen anybody be denied on their first application.
Wow,
Most
that's
of the
super
time,
interesting.
yeah.
Can I jump in to say what does get denied?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that could be denied is the 30% ruling related to your opening of your company. If you're too late and you're not within the proper timeline windows, that could be denied. And well, not to say that your visa couldn't be denied, but if you lose out on the opportunity to have the 30% ruling, you could still have the DAFT visa without it.
By the way, the 30% ruling, I know you alluded to this, but basically it's a tax break for foreigners in the Netherlands. I had it when I first lived there and it was amazing. I couldn't spend all my money. It was like great because you get the first 30% and it puts you in a lower tax bracket. So most people who are starting a business can get that tax break if they set up their BV correctly. And they can, if they haven't lived there before. I lived there for 10 years, so I'm not eligible anymore to get it again. But anyway, thank you. That's great. That's very helpful. Now, Aaron, go ahead.
Just one thing to that last question to add on to something Taylor said about the numbers. So I recently actually have just been in contact with IND because I submitted a WOO request. WOO is kind of, again, I'm not going to give the full Dutch pronunciation, but it's basically like a freedom of information request. So they got back to me saying normally they don't provide that for the data, it's only if it's done as part of a research project. But then they said in honor of the holidays, they were going to work on it for me. And after the new year, so I asked for some specific info, and it was basically as far back as if they could go back 20 years, but if not, at least back to 2022 with number of applications, number denied, a few other basic data points to give people some information to play with. But the general information, though, it's less than 1,000 a year. It's a few hundred. The process now, it's so streamlined that it's almost automatically approved, and then they have to find a reason why to take it away, and then the renewals, it's different. A lot of people self-select out, they move back, cultural stress, other things. People don't maintain the 4,500 euros in an untouched, account, and they can't provide a simple profit and loss to show that. You don't have to earn a profit, but you have to have an operational business and meet some really basic things. So most of the lack of renewals is kind of self-selecting out. And then when you get to permanent residency, it's more complicated. People have to prove 18 months prior of a minimum income and so on. But I've done a few countries where it's just not as streamlined as the Netherlands. Pick your language online. Learn Dutch, important, but everything is efficient. You can choose different languages. People, you call up IND if you have a question. They're not battling you. They're like, they'll work with you and explain. It's very streamlined compared to beautiful countries, but France, Brussels, where the offices fight over each other. No, it's the Flemish speakers. They messed up your paperwork. No, everything just works in the Netherlands.
It just works. Yeah,
I'll stop my comment there, but
Thank you. That's super helpful. And Christy, I see a lot of questions about wealth tax, and I had questions for you about that as well. People are getting very scared because they're hearing 30%. And they're thinking they're paying 30% of the value of their house. No, you're
Yeah,
not.
I can explain it a
Yeah.
bit. So
Yeah, go ahead and do that.
let's separate the two things. 30% ruling and wealth tax have nothing to do with each other. The 30% ruling essentially is a discount where only 70% of your income is taxable. So 30% of your income is not taxable. And I'll leave that aside now and just talk about the wealth tax, but just know 30% ruling and wealth tax, they don't have anything to do with each other. So wealth tax is a tax on the value of your net wealth. And what it is the Dutch answer to capital gains tax. So if you think about what you have in your wealth or asset portfolio, it looks at things like cash, individual brokerage accounts, a Roth IRA would count, a 529 college plan would count, an HSA, anything that's a fairly liquid asset counts for purposes of calculating wealth tax. What does not count is your primary residence, the home that you live in, tax deferred retirement accounts like your 401k or traditional IRA, and property that's located outside of the Netherlands for investment purposes. So what we do is we take a stock of your entire net wealth and then deduct out the items that are not included for part of it, so the excludable items. And then this is a fairly complex calculation, but essentially they assume that you should be able to make a certain percentage on the value of your assets every year. And then that assumed growth is what's taxed. Now, what it shakes out to is approximately 1% of your total net wealth per year as a tax. And that's a really generalized number because it very much depends on your asset mix. If you have a high cash asset mix, then you could have a much lower net wealth tax. And if you have a very high investment portfolio, you could have a higher net wealth tax. So just keep that in mind that it's not always 1% of your total net wealth, and it has nothing to do on with the actual growth or unrealized gains in any of your accounts. It's just a tax on what you should have made if your money is making money. And another thing to note is that it's changing. This rule is changing, and we don't really know what will be in place in the future. It's actually been deemed illegal. So the tax court is trying to figure out now how to replace it, but they have a deferment on it because it's so complicated to replace that it's taking them a long time to figure out a new way to do it.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, I hope that answered everybody's questions, but please don't forget that Christy has made herself available. You can make an appointment to discuss your specific situation on her website. Christy, can you just drop your appointment URL again in there?
So I'll put it in the chat again.
So people who have a lot of complicated questions, you will want to get in contact with Christy. But I don't think that the Netherlands is, I find the Netherlands is just as affordable, if not more, way more affordable than the US if you consider healthcare. You kind of have to think about balancing everything out, we've spent a fortune on healthcare in America and on property taxes that you don't spend in the Netherlands, for instance.
Yeah, and that's true, but people don't move to the Netherlands for their great tax rates, right? So if tax is a massive concern for you, it's something you would want to plan
Sort it
around
out in advance.
Certainly. There's a lot of great reasons to move here, but tax is not usually one of them.
Not the top issue, no. Okay, Taylor, we talked about housing, and you spoke briefly about how to manage it, but it is probably the number one issue I hear about on the boards of people who are going. But it seemed to me like you could pay in advance, like 4 or 5 months in advance, which seems a reasonable request if you're trying to rent a place. You can buy a house, although it's very expensive in major cities in the Netherlands. Or you can do short-term housing if you're young, and you could do a flat share with other people. There seem to be a lot of alternatives. Why do you think Americans get so worked up over housing? Like, where's that anxiety coming from, and what can they do to manage that?
I think the anxiety comes from the fact that everybody wants to move to Amsterdam. And
Mm.
the fact is that even Dutch people will tell you blatantly that it's really difficult to live in Amsterdam and to rent in Amsterdam. It is cost prohibitive, it is expensive. However, I will say when you compare it to San Francisco, New York, LA as well, it's not even comparable. So it's
Yeah,
really
I mean, the
about
costs are lower. Yeah.
yeah, it's really about keeping things in perspective. For European standards, Amsterdam rents are very expensive. For
Oh,
American standards, it might not be. And so I think the reason why people get so stressed is because they try to go in a place that is very highly competitive, a very highly competitive rental market, and then they try then to compete with people that have local work contracts and local jobs, and so put yourself in the perspective of a landlord. If he has one applicant that basically has a Dutch work contract guaranteed, and you really are just starting a business, you don't have so much guarantee. You need to think strategically in that way of how can you stand out and how can you be more strategic in your housing search. So if your goal is to move to the Netherlands, my recommendation is do not land in Amsterdam first unless you can afford it. If you can afford it, go for it. It's an amazing city. But I recommend going outside of the Randstad, which is basically the most population dense area of the Netherlands, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Utrecht, that area. As soon as you go more east, as soon as you go more north, southeast, southwest, the opportunities come towards you, very much so. And so it's much, much easier to have a conversation with the landlord. It's much, much easier to explain your situation to a landlord. And
mm.
that is the key, I think, really explaining what you're doing and showing that you have that ability to pay the rent. And as you said, that's exactly right. An idea you could offer is to pay 3, 4, 5 months of rent up ahead just to secure the housing and give some stability and good feeling to the landlord, so to speak.
Because the rents, I mean, I don't know about Amsterdam, but I was looking in Harlem for a couple of friends
Yeah,
who were thinking of moving to Harlem. I saw really nice, like 100 square meter apartments in Harlem, which were like 1,500, 1,600, 1,700 euros. That is way cheaper than even Fort Worth, but certainly cheaper than Dallas, like half the price of Austin. I
yeah,
saw people here from Austin. This is not expensive. Harlem is 10 minutes away from Amsterdam. So, I mean, you can also just, I mean, I think Amsterdam's great and I understand why people want to move there, but there are lots of alternatives even in the Randstad as well, right? So,
yes.
um,
It's
so
definitely different pricing.
yeah.
We're used to $3, $4, $5,000 a month for a studio or a one bedroom in New York and San Francisco.
Yeah.
You can
I
get
know
a really
people
nice place
10,000.
for that amount of
Yeah.
money in the Netherlands. I assure you
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I think buying is difficult in the Randstad. It's very, very expensive.
Yes.
It's more like New York or maybe not California prices, but it is expensive.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so just one more thing. I think we already addressed that. I'm just going through our questions. We've already addressed a lot of our questions. Aaron, what about the administrative burdens, and actually Christy too, this is for both of you, of being self-employed in the Netherlands? I didn't find it any more difficult than the US, except that I was asked to pay taxes up front based on estimated income, which actually was kind of helpful because then I didn't have a huge tax bill at the end of the year. But other than that, are there a lot of complicated issues? If you're not a BV, I know BV is more complicated. And if you have a BV, a BV is like a limited company. If you have a BV, you probably have a lot more administration. But if you're a ZZ payer, I guess you have less. I mean, what does it feel like in terms of administration burden if you're self-employed?
Christy, would you like to go first?
Aaron, why don't you go ahead and talk about it from the business perspective? I can talk about it from the professional side.
Yeah, and definitely, I don't want to give any incorrect information on the tax professional side, but as someone who is a ZZPer here, I find it quite straightforward. I have a pretty simplified structure for everything. I do not have any complicated connections with anything in the US. I have some pass-through income there from an S corp, but it's not anything complicated. So for me, I have a local Dutch tax accountant who I pay for a package. annually. There are a lot of different companies. I'm not going to pitch anybody here, but there's a lot of different companies. Some offer a monthly fee. I'd say that all of them, whether you pay it quarterly or monthly, it all comes out to around 1,000 roughly ballpark. Let's say that people, when they think about budgeting, you're going to find what you need, but around 1,000 is what you could spend for good responsive administration. And they handle my quarterly VAT reporting. I work almost exclusively outside the EU, let alone Netherlands. So I don't have any VAT, but I do get expenses back. They take all of that and they give me an annual profit and loss statement. A nice thing about sticking with, say, a service provider, instead of figuring out how to do it on your own, is it's easy when it comes to renewal and stuff. You have ready-made documents that they've can spit out for you easily because they've been doing all of your taxes and stuff for you. On the U.S. side, you're going to have considerations there. Christy will also be able to speak authoritatively to this, but I think that if you have a BV, there are some more complex reporting requirements on the U.S. side that you'd have to consider. My stuff is pretty simple, so I don't use TurboTax. I'm not going to get myself in trouble like Timothy Geithner or someone doing their TurboTax when they're living abroad, but there are some good like expat file, others. You know, it just depends upon your exposure and your considerations.
Thank you. That's great. I actually want to jump in on something else, which actually, Christy, you're probably the right person to answer this, but you all can answer this. Somebody just asked about retirement. So this is not a retirement visa. It's a working visa. You have to have a business. But I mean, I guess after a certain number of years, don't you get a permanent residency? Could you stay in the Netherlands and retire in the Netherlands? Would you be eligible for a Dutch state pension? Should you be building up your private pension? My experience from the Netherlands is that you definitely need a private pension. The state pension is not enough to live on, but you can also receive your SSI with the new law that just passed the other day. I think you would get your Social Security payment plus your Dutch pension plus your private pensions, but can you stay in the Netherlands when you're no longer running your business? Let's say you ran your business for 5 years and then you retire. Do you have to leave? What happens then if you're not running your business anymore?
Yeah. So exactly what you said, the visa is an entrepreneurship visa. It does not guarantee you the right to stay in the Netherlands past the term of the visa, which currently is a 2-year visa. So after the first 2 years is up, you need to go through the renewal process. And when you renew, you can get an additional visa. And I don't know actually off the top of my head if it's an additional 2 years or 5 years, but is it 2, Aaron?
Taylor,
I just renewed, so
yeah.
I just renewed like this past June, so it's 5 years. You do 2 years, and then at the renewal they gave me 5 years until 2029. But in 2.5 years from now, I'm eligible for permanent residency.
Yeah, exactly. So whether you've
which there are 2 types.
Right, exactly. So if you've been in the Netherlands for 5 years total, continuously, then you can apply for permanent residency. But there are additional. Sorry?
Can you ask for a passport?
So yes, but under
under
certain circumstances you can, but those are limited to family reasons, if you've been married to a Dutch person or if you have other options to get citizenship. But typically what you can get is permanent residency after you've been in the Netherlands for 5 years. But you do have to go through the steps to get permanent residency, which includes an integration exam as well.
And does that entitle you to live in the rest of Europe or just the Netherlands?
That permanent residency does only entitle you to live in the Netherlands.
Okay.
So when you apply for permanent residency, they evaluate it for 2 types at the same time. Dutch permanent residency. So as Christy said, you stay in the Netherlands long-term, and EU. EU meaning, it doesn't mean that you can just hop on a train and immediately live in another country, but each of the member states, and mostly all of them, it's very seamless. You are then allowed to go there and have a more streamlined process to establish your residency there. But it differs by country. And then if you stay outside longer than 10 years from the Netherlands, they can rescind your permanent residency. But effectively, yes, because in the Netherlands, as of right now, unless you have a Dutch partner, you have to relinquish your US citizenship in order to take Dutch citizenship. So there are very limited paths to dual citizenship. So most people, permanent residency is your end goal if you want to be here long term.
So I was able to get a Dutch passport because my husband is Dutch and I didn't have to give up US passport. So actually, if you're not married to an American, maybe consider marrying a Dutch person. Falling in love and marrying a Dutch person. It does
If someone wants a
life a lot
DAFT business
easier.
as a matchmaking service to find
Yeah, that's a great
partners for
idea.
internationals, there you go.
But I'd like to go back to two of the points before about the administration and also about retirement, if we could, for a moment.
Yeah. Yes,
So
please.
the administrative burden is significant for Americans in the Netherlands on the tax front, at least, because if you do go the DAFT route, you know, we have two options with DAFT. You can open a self-employed, sort of a sole proprietorship, or you can open a BV, which is like an LLC. But the BV is by default a foreign corporation, and the US, the IRS says that's complicated. And the administrative burden of having the foreign corporation is you are a shareholder of this corporation and you are required to report to the IRS all of the transactions and information of that business on an annual basis. And it can also mean that there are timing issues between how you pay out your payroll. If you provide dividends, you need to record corporate minutes. So there are definitely things that you need to do in order to satisfy all of that administrative burden, as well as being on payroll, filing payroll reports in the Netherlands, et cetera. So doing that yourself, especially in the first year that you're in the Netherlands, is not recommended. And there are plenty of good Dutch tax advisors, but Americans are used to a certain level of service that they don't always see with Dutch administrators and advisors. So be prepared to wait when you're working with your Dutch advisors. It's not like you can pop over an email and expect a response within 24 hours. No, you might get a response in 2 weeks in most cases. So do be on top of your administration, because the first time a blue envelope shows up in your mail with a 5,000 euro fine and an order from the king that they're going to repossess your TV, you're going to be a little frightened. And usually it's nothing. It just means that you've forgotten to file your VAT report. But as Taylor alluded to earlier, things work in the Netherlands. So if you're 1 day late on your sales tax report, you do get a massive fine, and it will come in the mail and it will scare you. So
Is that only for BVs or also for ZZP?
No, also for self-employed people, for sole proprietorships as well.
Okay.
So you do need to stay on top of your administration. And then on the front about retirement, yes, so you can essentially, if you have the residence permit available to you, you can retire in the Netherlands and you can still collect your Social Security. You can collect from your 401k, you can collect from your IRA, you can collect from Dutch pensions if you have had them set up, although I recommend that you do not set up Dutch pensions when you're self-employed. It can be very complex for tax purposes. But you can collect from the Dutch state Social Security, and all of those things are possible. And also, if you move back to the US, if you don't stay in the Netherlands permanently, you can even collect your Dutch Social Security when you're back in the US.
That's great. Thank you. Now, can you just tell us in a nutshell, if it's possible, who needs a BV, or can everybody do a ZZP? Why would you do a BV if you could do a ZZP?
So there used to be serious tax implications for doing a BV, but those have gotten less and less and less as the dividend tax has gotten higher, payroll tax has gotten higher, and the corporate tax has also gotten higher. So the current best reasons are liability protection. A ZZP does not offer you any liability protection where a BV does. But if you're the sole owner of your BV, that liability protection is a pretty short leash. So you can still have problems with liability even if you have a BV, in cases of fraud or mishandling of the company. So don't think it's like the ultimate shield, but it's similar to an LLC. And then another reason would be if you have a lot of investment opportunity where you think you might get other investors involved, or taking on either cash investments or equity partners, then you will want to have a BV structure. And the BV is seen as a more established business here in the Netherlands. So taking on contracts with larger companies, they will probably want to do business with you as a BV as well.
But would it make sense for everybody to just start out as a ZZP and then?
No, not necessarily. There is a significant tax implication that going back to the 30% ruling.
Right.
If you do start a BV, then you're eligible to have your BV apply to hire you as an employee, and you as the employee get the 30% ruling. 30% ruling means that 70% of your income is taxable and 30% of it is not. So you'll pay out a salary to yourself as the director of the company, and that salary will be only taxable, only 70% of your salary is taxable. So that would be a significant tax benefit, although it is changing, and starting from 2027, it's going to be a 27% ruling.
Yeah. So
May I ask
actually,
Christie?
Yeah, sorry.
No,
so
I'm
there's-
sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Aaron.
I just want to ask a question of Christie just to clarify. One of the important, you said it's that's one of the benefits, but if I understand correctly, you have to set up a BV before your move into the Netherlands to get to apply for the 30% ruling as later. Is that correct? Or
Yeah,
could you
not
clarify
necessarily. Yeah, exactly. So not necessarily before your move, but there has to be some conversation about hiring you from abroad. That is the whole goal around the 30% ruling, is that you have been hired from abroad. Now, when it's your own company, are you emailing with yourself? Hey, should I send you an employment contract? No, obviously not. So really, it has to do with this 90-day window. Taylor, did you do that?
I did not do a BV
Okay.
for that exact reason. For ZZP, I found it easier, and it is, while you lose on the 30% ruling, if you're just starting out your business and you don't expect to in any way to be in a high income bracket,
Right.
I didn't find it as worthwhile, and the possibility in the future to change to a BV is always there for me. While the other way around, I've heard not so easy.
Both ways are possible, but the 30% ruling is only available at the start of the company. And so within the first 90 days of your residency, you have to already have the 30% ruling granted, and you cannot get it if it's done after. Do you talk about this in your tax guide? Sorry, not tax guide, in your DAFT guide?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a
Okay.
breakdown exactly of the pros and cons of each one and which one makes sense for both, because I had that question as well myself so much. And there's a lot of information out there, but I spoke with a tax consultant as well, and he broke it down to me specifically how it makes sense for each person. And so, yeah, absolutely. In my guide, there's a whole section on starting the business and what makes more sense.
Yeah.
So could I just suggest that if you are somebody who is coming, like I already have my clients and my income, I know how much my income is going to be. If I were eligible for the 30% ruling, which I'm not, then I would contact Christie and say, Christie, help me sort this out because I want the 30% ruling. I want a BV. I want to take write off my moving costs and that sort of thing. So you should plan in advance for that if you know what your income is going to be. If you're a young person, or you don't know where your income is going to come from, but you're going to go there and try to make it, then you probably don't need a BV because you don't know what your tax liability is, and you don't have probably heavy moving costs, and you don't want the heavy administrative costs. Is that a good summary, Christie?
Yeah, exactly. And I saw somebody in the chat allude to this 100,000 marker. That 100,000 marker is kind of a myth. It's not really where the tax implications start or begin or end. It's not a magic number for anybody. There's a lot more that goes into whether or not you need the liability protection. And it's not just about the taxes, but yeah, if you are a higher income earner, you only have one shot to get the 30% ruling. So then you might want to consider it. And if you're not a higher income earner, then it's just going to be a lot of extra administrative burden, and it's more complex than you need.
And if you can't get percent ruling, also, it's probably not worth it. For me, or my personal experience is that it's not worth it.
If I may add
Yeah, go ahead.
a quick point on that, though, because to add to the considerations that Christine Taylor spoke about, when you are in that ideation phase of your business or trying to figure out what you're going to do, it's very important when you don't have to have a business plan to give to the KVK when you go apply, but it is important for you to do that. Like I showed with that business model canvas, have some idea to figure this out because revenue is very important consideration. If you take the BV route, you were to pay a minimum salary. I forget what the current numbers are. It's like 59,000 euros, something like that.
Yeah.
And if you can't meet that consistently, and this isn't just like, okay, I can just pull from savings, I mean, to a point, but you need to factor that in. You can have a solid business plan, but Is the revenue realistic for you to go that route with the extra administrative costs and such? So all of these important pieces of information come together when you're creating the business too, not just when you're going to pay the taxes and stuff. That's happened beforehand.
I'm not encouraging this, but I've heard that a lot of people use the DAFT. They're not really setting up a business. They're somehow looking like they're making a business, but they're really just living on savings or whatever. I'm not encouraging anyone to do that because I think the Netherlands is a bit expensive for that, and I think there are cheaper places to live on passive income. But how strict are they when they're looking at your renewal? I've also heard they're getting more strict, like some people never set up a business, but now they really want to see that you have a proper business going. Like, what's your sense? Taylor, you might be the right person to answer that, or Aaron, whoever, just tell me what you're seeing. Are people really, are people really abusing the DAFT visa and not starting businesses? What's happening?
I'll just comment briefly because I think Aaron just renewed, so he might have more insight. But no, you cannot come here and not open a business. That's not possible. As we mentioned, it's a requirement. Now, many people use it as a sort of digital nomad visa, as a retirement visa, as many different ways, because the great thing of the DAFT visa is that there are, as Aaron said, there's no income requirements. Officially, there's no income requirements. However, at the time of renewal, you will be scrutinized to show you have a website. Have you reached out to clients? Why do you not have any income? But I think I'll leave it to Aaron, as he probably has more recent knowledge on this.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just say, Teller made great points there. And one of the things I'm looking forward to, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if everyone was here when I mentioned this, but I requested some information from IND. I'm looking forward to that because it will give some numbers to all the rumors and things that people pass around. But in general, I think the hurdles required to do this, it weeds people out unless they're genuinely interested in doing it. But good intentions, this is where, when I love advising people on developing their businesses, because this is where good intentions have to meet some reality so that you don't end up in a stressful situation. And I think the general gist of renewals, mine, it was very smooth. Again, having done this in a few other countries, I did it entirely online. I selected my language. My Dutch is not so great. So I just select English, and it was very straightforward. Because I have worked with one accountant that I have with their firm, I have just a subscription, and every year they give me a profit and loss statement. So I just downloaded those, 3 of them. I had a couple of little bullets that I had to check off saying I'd only been out of the country a certain amount of time. This is one consideration. When you have your DAFT visa, technically it's for the Netherlands. Now, there's no border checks in the Schengen zone. It's not really checked. Technically, they're not really checking to see how often you're out of the EU or Schengen, but technically you are limited. If you have extra time you need to be out, you can request if it's for professional reasons or family reasons. I had, unfortunately, some family reasons I had to stay out longer. Just contact IND and get pre-approval, and it doesn't count against you. But you just check off these things and then submit it, and it was less than 30 days I had my approval. I think most of the considerations with these renewals is that you have an ongoing business that is real. I have to provide a current KVK extract. When you get to the 5-year point, if you want to apply for a permanent residency, there is more scrutiny on actual income. Again, you have to prove a minimum. The numbers updated always on IND. I think it's roughly, I don't know, between 1,800, 2,000 euros a month for the 18 months previous. But again, you can check that at the source. And then you're talking about, do you want to make a long-term life there? Hopefully you haven't been just winging it on savings for 5 years, or you've got much better savings than I do. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if Christy has anything to add to it, but that's my take.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's being abused either. I do see that there are different types of businesses running. I have clients who run a loss for many years on DAFT, but are actually trying to make it, like some of those storefronts you mentioned that, they open a restaurant, and restaurants tend to lose money for their first several years. So you can have a legitimate business that runs at a loss, but it is cash intensive. And you do need to be able to pay yourself that shareholder salary minimum, which Aaron mentioned before. So not as a ZZP, you don't have to pay yourself a minimum salary, but it's still a cash intensive process. If you move abroad and you don't have the cash to fund it, it's not going to work out in the end. You do need to be prepared to be able to fund your life when you're living in the Netherlands.
Yeah, thank you. That's very good. We're not even going to get to all of my questions, much less this is so interesting. I don't know if everybody else is finding this as interesting as I am, but I have so many questions. So first of all, I just want to say to everybody, if we don't get to your questions today, please do reach out to Aaron, Christy, and Taylor. Can you each drop I know you've done it, but can you just again drop your URL into the chat, and maybe speak it out for people who are seeing this on YouTube later. So why don't we just go through? Taylor, what is your website address?
Yes, so my website address is tzstrategies.com. So T as in Taylor, Z as in zebra for say, and strategies.com. And basically on this website, you'll be able to find the guides that I have crafted over the last couple of months. I've been working really hard because I've been, as I said, I've spent months and months on end researching the different options for Americans in the EU. I thought of Portugal, I thought of Spain, I thought of Belgium, I thought of France. And I can say with confidence that this DAFT visa is the easiest way to move to the EU. However, the application process can be overwhelming. There are a lot of steps. There's a lot of things that you need to think about. There's a lot of different websites where you need to make appointments. You have to go, you have to find where to do all these appointments. It took me a while to figure it all out. And so to make it easier and less stressful for people moving to the Netherlands, I've created this guide. It's more than 30 pages. It's beautifully crafted. It has all the links, phone numbers, addresses, forms, steps, everything that you need in there to understand the application process. So again, if you go to tzstrategies.com, you'll be able to find my guide there, and you can use the code JANA5 to have a special discount just for watching this webinar.
Thank you, Taylor. Aaron, now can you give us your URL? Speak out your URL for people who are watching this on YouTube later, and anything else you want to tell us.
Yeah, I just shared a link to the contact page and URL for the website in the chat, and it's Global Approach Advising, www.globalapproachadvising.com. And please feel free to reach out. 30-minute consultation is always free, querying questions. Generally, when I'm working with businesses and professional clients, I work in one way, but with individuals as well, people who are preparing themselves to build a business, ideation, developing some sustainable business plans, internationalizing your professional resume profiles for the EU markets that you're entering. Those are the sort of things that I'm glad to talk about. But it's easy with me, no hard sales pitch. I love connecting with people, learning their story, and then seeing if there's a good way that I can support you in getting to where you want to be. So yeah, definitely reach out. And it's been a real pleasure to connect and talk here. The other panels are really interesting.
Thank you. And Christy.
Yes, so I just put in the chat. You can reach my team at www.bnctax.com, and that's Bravo November Charlie tax.com. And we do our first consultation, which is a 15-minute call, is free. You'll connect with one of my advisors. We have the largest US tax advisory practice in the Netherlands, and we help over 1,000 clients a year here in the Netherlands file their US taxes. Please be aware, we are not a Dutch tax firm, so we do not do any Dutch taxes ourselves, but we work in tandem with a number of Dutch tax firms in partnership. So if you do want to have a joint consultation, that's possible as well.
And you can you help people though set up a BV, or would you refer them to?
Nope, we don't. We have partners that we work with for that.
Oh, right. Okay. So, but they should come to you anyway, probably to ask questions about their.
Yeah, I think, what people really like about working with us is we speak American. Almost all my colleagues are American, and all of them are expats themselves. So we are located in the Netherlands. We understand how things work, and we will be free to give you as much information as we know on the Dutch tax side. We just have to confirm it with the Dutch tax advisors, of course. So we're here to help guide you along the way, even if it's not totally our area of expertise.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. There's so many moving pieces in all of this. Like you've got to figure out what business you're going to do. And you've got to figure out what your tax regime is going to be, whether you're going to be a BV or a ZZP. You got to figure out where to live. You've got to figure out how to manage the business and all that. So there are a lot of moving pieces. Oh, and one more thing that we still have a few more minutes. I want to go back to one of the questions. My experience, first of all, I think the Netherlands is an amazing place for children. I think every year it's one of the top places in the world for children being happiest. And I feel like the whole society is very welcoming and permissive of children. They go to restaurants, they participate in society. And you see a lot of what I love. You see a lot of young children or young adults, like maybe 12 to 15, holding hands with their parents walking around in the street. I mean, it's very sweet. It's a great place for children, I think. And the schools, the public schools even are really accessible for expats. And because there are a lot of schools where the instruction is in English, at least half of the instruction is in English. And I feel like the international schools are really for people who are just kind of coming through the Netherlands, who aren't planning to make it their home, people who want to be on an international system because maybe next year they're going to Japan. But I feel like most expats that I've known would send their kids to public school. So they would be very integrated. There's a lot of egalitarianism as well. And so they fit more into society if they are in a more public school. I don't think Christy, you have young children, but
Mhm.
probably.
My daughter just started school. Yeah. So we're now in the public school system as well. We could do an entire webinar on the school system, probably should someday.
We actually have
yeah.
a call coming up on, I want to say the 26th, about education in the EU. But yes, someone asked the question about children. Children are very much welcome as a part of your DAFT visa, right? They're just children under 18.
Minor children, yes, minor
Minor,
children, not
yeah,
adult children.
not
And
adult children.
there are also a lot of people who come and try to bring their elderly parents or siblings and that kind of thing. So those are different visa requirements. The DAFT is really for you and your immediate family only.
And I think we did mention this, or somebody asked the question in the chat. If you are married to someone who you're the entrepreneur, the person you're married to, or is your partner, I'm not sure what the requirements are. Probably partner is okay. They are allowed, they have access to the Dutch employment market. And depending on the skill levels, depending on their skill level and what they're doing, they would be able to certainly apply for jobs, and if they got a job, be able to work, which would probably provide more income stability if you're building a business. So yes, families are very welcome. And then there was a question, what's an SBDC? Is there an SBDC in the Netherlands? I don't know what that
I
is.
assume that has to do with Small Business Administration.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well,
If that's what they're talking about, then there is a
Yes, thank you.
yeah.
It's a federal
Okay.
program, and then there's always just amazing support, especially market research. Figured I'd ask if there was something like that in the Netherlands. Thank you.
okay.
Yeah. So there's a website, business.gov.nl, where you can find a lot of information about small businesses, as well as the local KVKs are quite supportive. But in general, the Netherlands is an entrepreneurial country. Historically, it's incredibly entrepreneurial, maybe too much so. Exactly. But it is deeply ingrained in the culture.
Yes.
So there is a lot of support for business throughout the culture in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Could I say one thing too? I think that was Elizabeth who shared that question. So it was a great question, and while some of those resources are sometimes differently called or organized here, one thing I've also still benefited from are resources back in the U.S. for getting information, and maybe not necessarily direct, grants or anything like that for here, but as a veteran also, I work with some of the Small Business Administration's veterans programs. If you do end up having something like a pass-through back in the U.S. to make it easier to work with your U.S. clients, an LLC or whatever, there's definitely still resources there that might not directly be helping your Dutch business, but are still going to be beneficial in terms of knowledge, information, and support. So, yeah.
Can I just ask a question of the participants by show of hands? If you're considering coming to the Netherlands, do you already have a business in the US or elsewhere that you would just be expanding to the Netherlands or working basically as a digital nomad? So in this group already has a business that you would be bringing to the Netherlands? So only a few so far. Anybody else? Oh, more. Okay. So, I mean, it's really easy that in that case. So put your hands back down. And of other people on here, does anybody not have a business idea or not have a business experience? Like, so who doesn't have a business idea or business experience? Self-employment. Elizabeth's, yeah. So probably you need a lot of support. Debbie. I think it's harder in your case. I did speak to Aaron and the other panelists earlier about this. I have been self-employed most of my life, either as a business owner, when I worked in a bigger business, but I was one of the owners, or self-employed like I am now, which is just freelance. And I just think naturally like a self-employed person. And I have friends who've wanted to start businesses and they found it very challenging because they just don't think like that. So I just encourage you to reach out to Aaron in particular if you need to get your business going and think about what does that look like. I would invest some time and energy in making sure that you really are you're somebody who can be self-employed and can make a living at being self-employed. I think that Aaron's a great resource for that. And Taylor, you were saying you had a different business when you came to the Netherlands. Is that what you said?
Yes, that's right. So in the US, I had an e-commerce business. So I do have to preface with the fact that I studied business and finance. So I have kind of been bred to do this in so to speak. So I have that technical background. But apart from that, yeah, I had different businesses in the US, mainly online. I had a car rental company at what point in the US. So many different
You're
things.
just
But
naturally entrepreneurial, it
This
sounds
guy's
like.
the American entrepreneur story.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that about the US,
Yeah.
it's really like full on, go for it, try it, and no problem, and that is such a healthy culture in one way. Sometimes it's brought to an extent too much, but I really appreciated the fact that in the US, anybody can tell you, you have an idea, go for it, try to make it happen, and
And I
let's
think
see how it
Dutch
goes.
are the Dutch are very entrepreneurial, like Christy said as well.
Yes.
And I think they're very supportive and welcoming of that. And I know, Christy, you already had a business when you came to the Netherlands, right? You changed focus a bit.
Yeah, I did. I was already a tax advisor, and I just continued what I was already doing and just switched to the expat realm. But just to give you an idea, I mean, there's anything that can be in business. We have people who are photographers. I saw somebody in here said that they're a language teacher or translator. Those kinds of things are certainly possible.
Translation is a big business. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But there's also doctors, lawyers, chiropractors, bakers, and all kinds of things. The key is that you have to have some money. So you need to make a profit or you need to have money, because without one of those two things, it will be a struggle. And just having the foundation of being able to understand what does it mean to make a profit and, not depend on an employer for a paycheck. That's really the basis of the DAFT visa.
Yeah.
And I think
Go ahead.
one of the things about this is not to be too daunted. If you don't have the idea yet, the great thing is there's a lot of, I got to think about taxes and revenue, but there's also just having a lot of fun with what can you do with ideas. Look at all the things you use in your life and your world that someone has turned into their business, maybe out of a passion. But, I did have some business education, but a lot of it has been figuring it out. Each step, you have to do it for the first time sometime. I was in the Navy. Then after that, I didn't get my degree in business. I studied philosophy for my bachelor's and then went into business and kind of learned it by making mistakes all the time. Then I did the MBA in France, but it didn't necessarily prepare me for being an entrepreneur. You have to have some opportunity to just kind of jump in the sandbox and play around and think, what are my ideas? If you are then building a plan, you can start testing that out while you're in the US, start earning revenue, start learning what's right for you. Maybe you're like, no, I just want to get this certification, get my PMP certification and just be hired out freelance. I don't want to own a business, but I'll set up the business structure. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're like, have a great idea that you can build, but don't be too scared to the fact that you don't have formal experience.
That's great. One final question, actually. What about health insurance? How do people get their health insurance when they're self-employed? I know it's not expensive compared to the US, but I feel like what's the
Same way
process?
they do if they're employed, pretty much.
Well,
I
if
mean,
you're employed, your employer gives it to you or you buy it through your employer, but
not in the Netherlands, but Kirsty, I see you shaking your head, so maybe you want to speak about this.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. Yeah, no, everyone's responsible for their own health insurance. It's
Good.
possible if you're employed that your employer provides it or pays you a stipend for it. But essentially what you do is once you become a resident, you need to have your BSN number before you can apply for health insurance. There's no way for you to get it without that. And then you need to find an insurer. And there's a website, which I'm blanking on, but I'll try to find it and put it in the
Oh,
chat.
I'd love to know that personally.
Yeah, it's basically a website to compare different insurers and
Mm.
insurance plans. So you can start there to find an insurer. And once you've chosen an insurer because you like the plans they provide, then you can start your application process with the insurer. A lot of people choose one that will have a website available to them in English. That can be helpful if you don't speak Dutch yet. So that's one thing to consider. But across the board in the Netherlands, the insurance companies are required to all provide a certain basic level of insurance, and then there are
At the
add-on
same
plans that
price.
you can choose.
Mhm.
Yeah, and at the same price. And there are add-on plans that you can choose above that level.
My
I'll find that
experience-
website and drop it in the chat.
My experience was it was much cheaper than the US with either no co-pays or none of that. And they can't reject claims if your doctor referred you. And you had a very, very small deductible it used to be 250. It's probably more now, but it was like 250 for the
You can
year.
adjust that
And
when you
yeah,
sign up. But it's a different health culture, though, and so
yes.
I think it works very straightforward. But this is part of the cultural aspects of more living abroad and being part of a new culture. They have a lot of great health outcomes here because it's a more homogeneous population than ours, very healthy lifestyle, a lot of movement and stuff. But for example, all of us Americans, we usually get an annual physical at least, right? That's not really a thing in the Netherlands. I remember the first time talking to my doctor, was like, well, what? Do you need some paracetamol? And it's like, no. I'm just like, they're more hands off. But everything works pretty straightforward when it comes to the administration, I think.
And somebody asked, how can they find us? If everybody's on Instagram, it's probably on the websites that have been given out as well. I'm the Jana Sanchez on Instagram, and you can find me on Facebook. I changed the name of my public page it was just Janalyn Sanchez, but now it's Janalyn Sanchez resource page, so people know that this is the place you go to for information about moving abroad. And our next call is next week. We're supposed to be ending a few minutes ago, but our next call is next week, and that is Spain, which I know a lot of people are excited about, especially passive income people are excited about Spain. Again, I want to thank Taylor, Aaron, and Christy. This was amazing. So informative, so helpful, and you went above and beyond what we expected from you, so that's even better. Super helpful. I hope you guys will take advantage of making appointments with them if you need their services, or buying Taylor's book, and whatever. They are great resources, you can see. So anyway, thank you all so much, and thank you for participating. I will get this up onto YouTube. I'm busy baking sourdough bread today, so I'm not exactly sure when it'll get onto YouTube, but soon. So okay, thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Jana.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.